Hello and welcome to the Complete Podcast Network. I'm Anthony Wilson, recording from Los Angeles, California. No preamble, I'm just going to get right into it. On Saturday night, the New York Knicks, they did it. The final score was Knicks 94, Spurs 90 in Game 5 of the NBA Finals. And the New York Knicks have officially won their first NBA championship since 1973. So the 53-year drought ends. Jalen Brunson was named MVP of the finals after scoring 45 of the Knicks' 94 points in the clincher. He shot 14 of 27 in 45 minutes, averaged 33 points a game in the finals, compared to Cat, who averaged 13 points a game. If you recall, I talked about Bomani Jones saying that Cat's been the best player on the Knicks in the postseason, and saying after the first two games that Cat would be the finals MVP. Well, no. As I said, so Brunson, basically, he proved everybody wrong. He proved me wrong. He proved Becky Hammon wrong. And of course, Becky Hammon famously said that Jalen Brunson could not be the best player on the championship team as a small lead guard, and he proved them wrong. I say now that Jalen Brunson, after this season and this series, he's the I would have to say he's the third best small guard to ever play after Steph Curry and Isaiah Thomas. You know, well, actually, well, because okay, so that kind of leads me into. So I wanted to try to figure out where does Brunson rank now on the all-time point guards list after this epic finals and winning the championship, leading the Knicks to their first championship in 53 seasons. Now, obviously, at the top, Magic Johnson is number one. Steph Curry is number two. Now, depending on where you stand, Jerry West, by any estimation, at least in my opinion, is one of the top 15 or so, top 15 players to ever play NBA basketball. And Jerry West is 6'2", right? Now, back when Jerry West was playing like Oscar Robertson, they didn't really delineate between point guard, shooting guard, small forward, power forward. They were just guards and forwards, right? And so Jerry West, at 6'2", you'd figure he was a point guard. To me, Jerry West always, well, really he was just a guard, right? Just like Oscar Robertson. But to me, uh, if I had to, I would say Oscar Robertson was a point guard. If I had to pick one, I'd say Oscar Robertson was a point guard, and I have to say that Jerry West was a shooting guard. But so it just if and so I have to take back what I said because Jerry West is Jerry West. So I would say that this would make Brunson the fourth best small guard. It's funny because we don't. I don't know why we don't think of Jerry West as a when we think of that. When we talk about small guards, we think about Isaiah and Curry and Tiny Archibald and Allen Iverson. For some reason, we don't think about Jerry West in that way. I guess he played bigger than what he was. But yeah, so in any regard, so yeah, so this would make Brunson top four small guards to ever play, and then okay, so the point guards list. Going back to that, so Magic one, Curry two. If you consider West a point guard, he'd be third, right, in my book, followed by Oscar, Isaiah, Bob Cousy, Walt Clyde Frazier, and so that would be my top seven or six if you take West out and consider him a shooting guard, right? Now, so the next group of guys before Saturday night, you got in whatever order you want to put them on. You got You got Gary Payton, Jason Kidd, Steve Nash, Chris Paul, all great players, but Oh, I forget John Stockton. John Stockton also. So that's five right there. We're kind of in the same group. Basically, all great players, but people who were never the best player on a championship team. Peyton and Kidd did end up winning championships, but more like later in their career as role players, basically. Nash never made the finals. Chris Paul made it in 2021 and was up to nothing and then couldn't finish the job. John Stockton made the finals back to back years with the Jazz in '97 and '98, and of course lost to Michael Jordan and the Bulls. But all of these guys are basically they never were able to do what Jalen Brunson did. You know, Gary Payton was he the best player on the '96 Sonics? It was close enough between him and Sean Kemp. I think if the Sonics had won that championship, which obviously they really didn't have a chance of doing. Basically, if the Sonics had won the championship in the '90s, we probably would put Gary Payton in the crop with those other six or seven guys I just named, who. Well, I mean, it was I guess Frazier. I guess Frazier. Oh, I'd say Walt Frazier was between him and Willis Reed. Yeah, I probably said Walt Frazier. It's close. It's kind of similar. You can't forget how great Sean Kemp was in his time, right? Just look, you have to look back on it, because of how it ended up. You forget, but Sean Kemp at the time was special. But anyway, the point being now, where does do you is it possible to move Jalen Brunson ahead of these guys now, ahead of Peyton, Kidd, Nash, Chris Paul, and John Stockton? Yeah, remember Brunson has only been at an elite level really. He's been in New York for 4 years. It's been a hell of like 4 years though. 24 points and 6 assists in 2023, 29 points a game 2 years ago, 26 points a game the last 2 years. He's pretty much always on the court, at least 65 games in all those years, and he's just did the unthinkable. You're talking about a guy who was a 33rd pick in the draft after I forget if he was on one or both of the championship teams at Villanova under Jay Wright, and now he's an NBA champion. He just hit one of the most epic closeout performances in the history of the finals. I think I read that only four players in history have had 45 points in a closeout game in the finals. That's Bob Pettit, Giannis, Michael Jordan, and now Jalen Brunson. So I mean, the point is that this guy is not entering into those types of conversations just based off this postseason run. And don't forget the Knicks went 16-3 this postseason. And I'm not sure where their point differential is after, because this series was close, but the Knicks just down the stretch were just a better team against a very young Spurs team. The Spurs led by double digits in every game. They led by 16 points in this game. Brunson, it was a real carry job tonight. I'm sorry, Saturday night. Cat only had 2 points in 23 minutes before fouling out, though he did have 10 rebounds. Mitchell Robinson had 10 rebounds off the bench. For the Spurs, Wemby had 19 points and 14 rebounds, but De'Aaron Fox was pretty much a no-show, 3 for 15, 7 points, a very forgettable finals for him. Stephon Castle was 1 for 10 for 6 points. Dylan Harper had a fantastic finals for a 20-year-old rookie. He had 25 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists off the bench. And he obviously forecast their second best player going forward. I think the question will be now, what do the Spurs do with De'Aaron Fox? Now, the Spurs are not yet in a position where they have to make these types of decisions because their core is so young. So they can afford right now to have Harper, Fox, and Castle, right? They don't need all three. Obviously, De'Aaron Fox would be the odd man out. Castle's already so good. Harper looks like he'll be even better than Castle is. But do the Spurs this summer try to move De'Aaron Fox? He probably makes too much money to justify him coming off the bench. But also, as people have said, Dylan Harper's too good to come off the bench for another year. I mean, it just wouldn't make sense. And the way Fox struggled in these playoffs, right, especially in the finals, you know, I mean, it's just the writing is the writing is on the wall. So, but yeah, the Spurs will have their day. They will learn from this. Like I said, it was a 5 game series and they led by double digit points in every game, but only won one game. So they'll learn. And you would think that when De'Aaron Fox was in South Carolina, he was probably the best closer in the league. Or I mean, there was nobody better. He did not want to. I mean, it was like a walking bucket in the fourth quarter. But I don't know. He got to San Antonio, and it's like he lost his powers. I want to give a shout out to Mike Brown because I was wrong. I said when the Knicks fired him, it's just like he's a New York type of coach. He's from that same lineage of Riley. Riley was the man, and Van Gundy was the assistant. And then once Van Gundy took over, Tibbs was the assistant under Van Gundy. They brought in Mike, and they fired Tibbs, thinking maybe they needed a new voice to get them over the hump. They brought in Mike Brown, who's obviously had a long coaching career himself, going all the way back to his Cleveland days. He coached the Lakers. He coached Cleveland again. He coached Sacramento. And now finally he's an NBA champion. And basically in the end it turned out to be just like when the when the Warriors fired Mark Jackson, who had done a good job. He got them got them to the point of being a Western Conference playoff team and even a Western Conference contender to a certain degree. And then you needed, when they fired him, I think it was, I mean, I always remember Frank Isola saying, that'll teach Mark Jackson to take a young team that doesn't play defense, teach him how to play defense, make him a real legitimate Western Conference playoff team. And we all saw what happened though. Steve Kerr comes in, he unlocks that offense, he fully unlocks Steph Curry, and he realizes that Draymond Green, although David Lee had been a good player for the Warriors, he realized that Draymond Green was a person who would allow them to be great and be special. And the rest is history. And Mike Brown came in, and the Knicks during the playoffs, during the regular season, just pretty much the same old Knicks. In the playoffs, they went to another level. And shout out to Mike Brown. Shout out to the black man. Also, of course, what also allowed this to happen was the Knicks upgrading from Julius Randle to Karl Towns. That happened before last season. Now, the Knicks with Randle were good. But when they got Karl Anthony Towns is just as good as Julius Randle is, Karl Anthony Towns is just a higher caliber talent. That's right. He was the first overall pick in the draft coming out of Kentucky. And Julius Randle, I think, went 7th when he came out. So he's just a higher end talent. And he allowed them to do a little bit more, stretching the floor. He's bigger. And now he's an NBA champion. So good for him. Jordan Clarkson is also an NBA champion now. He was one of the baby Lakers back in the day. Villanova. The Nova Knicks, they did it. It sucks that Dante DiVincenzo, he had to be sacrificed in order for the Knicks. It always sucks when beloved, players, who I think, put a lot of pride or take a lot of pride in playing for a certain franchise, and they have to go in order for the team to reach the ultimate pinnacle of being a championship team. Like I always say, Vladi was a true Laker. but we had to sacrifice Vladi for the Shaq and Kobe era to happen. So um, yeah. So shout out to DiVincenzo. It's too bad, but three of the four Nova Knicks, Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, Mikal Bridges, they're NBA champions now, and yeah, start spreading the news. OG Anunoby, after his heroics in Game 4, he had 11 points and 8 rebounds tonight. Now, if you look at his NBA Finals, people were saying that OG could even possibly be Finals MVP after what he did in Game. Let's see, he had 28 points in Game 3 and 33 points in Game 4, and of course the famous tip-in. For the series, he averaged 21 points, 5 rebounds. He shot 53% from the field, 50% from three, 87% from the free throw line. So he was probably their second best player. Definitely was their second best player in this series when Cat only averaged 13 points a game. So shout out to OG. He's a two-time champion now. When he was with the Raptors in 2019, he was on the team, but he didn't play in the finals because he had appendicitis. I guess he was. I forget who he was. Was he talking to Lisa Salters tonight after the game? Or was he talking to Ernie? I forget who it was. She brought that up. But yeah, so he's a two-time champion now. And yeah, man. What can I say? The Knicks, they made New York proud. And I'm someone who, when I was coming up, I was a big New York hip hop guy, even though I'm born and raised in Los Angeles. But I always liked New York hip hop. When I was a kid, my dad even would my dad would play Life After Death on the cassette tape. Probably when I was too young to listen to that type of music, but it was kind of like my introduction to hip hop. And so, and then as I got older, I would, when I was in high school, like I said, the four defining acts of my high school career were Kanye West, Game, 50 Cent, and G Unit, and then also Cameron and Dipset. So we were here in Los Angeles on the West Coast, but we looked up to 50 Cent and G Unit. We looked up to Dipset and what they were doing. Sports wise, I didn't really care too much for New York teams. I mean, when I was a kid, like I said, my dad was at Crenshaw when Strawberry was there. So when Straw was playing for the Yankees, he was always he'd always be talking Strawberry this, Strawberry that. And back then I was like very contrarian, so I would root against the Yankees just. But then once they lost to Arizona in 2001, my respect for them it started to grow. And so ever since then, I always pretty much hoped the Yankees would do well. I learned to appreciate how great Derek Jeter was. Obviously, Mariano Rivera is the greatest ever at what he did. And the Giants, New York Giants, I used to root for the Patriots, so that I never really appreciated what the Giants beating the Patriots those two times in the Super Bowl. And as far as the Knicks go, Knicks just were never, obviously I remember the Spreewell and Houston teams better than I remember the Ewing teams of that first part of the 90s. But ever since those teams, the Knicks really hadn't even been close until those Carmelo teams really weren't that good. 2013, that was their best Carmelo team, and the Pacers got them out of there in 6. So in the second round, so it took Jalen Brunson coming here to take the Knicks back to that level and really try to restore that feeling that Pat Riley and Jeff Van Gundy once had the city of New York feeling. But yeah, like I said, me growing up listening to New York hip hop and being a fan, and just kind of just being a fan of New York, a lot of times wish I was from New York. I was like there's a certain character and a certain like vibe, and I feel like it's just you probably just have so much pride being from New York City. You really just feel like man, you're really just you're from you belong to something. A lot of us in Los Angeles, if like me, I'm from the inner city of Los Angeles, but I grew up inside, as they say. And I've never in any way interacted with gang culture, and besides just observing it on the internet, like I'm a No Jumper fan, stuff like that. But outside of that, that wasn't my lifestyle at all. So I always felt like I kind of didn't have I'm not like I don't like I really don't belong to anything, even though I'm from LA. There's so many different types of people in Los Angeles. I think a lot of people don't understand that, you know. But so yeah, so I always kind of I guess envied or was a little jealous, but really I just admire the way that New Yorkers just they have that there's a certain culture there, and if you're from there, you you're you like I said you belong to something, and you can kind of rest your laurels on that. I guess if you could say that, there's just a certain pride that I don't feel being from. I mean, I definitely feel pride being from Los Angeles, but I'm sure it's not. I know it's not like the pride that New Yorkers feel being from New York City. So yeah. Shout out to the Knicks, man. They finally did a great basketball city, the best basketball fans I think in the world, and they deserve it. They waited a long time. The Knicks were so close. In '94 the Knicks were up 2-1 on the. I'm sorry, 3-2 on the Rockets going back to Houston, and just weren't quite able to get it done. Patrick Ewing was such a great player, but Hakeem was just a little bit better. And then John Starks was their second best guy. And I always said the Knicks have never had a godlike player. Like I said the last time I the last time I did the solo episode, never had a godlike player as great as Frazier and Willis Reed and Bernard King and Patrick Ewing and Carmelo. And then, Jalen Brown, I mean, like I said, man, when you talk about godlike, you're talking Kareem, you're talking Wilt, you're talking Jordan, you're talking Magic, you're talking Bird. So it's not a lot of those. Like I said, Wemby is one of them. But, I mean, they never really had a guy like that. So Patrick, as great as he was, Hakeem was a little bit better. Hakeem was godlike, you know. Or, I pretty much say Hakeem was a godlike player, you know. Patrick wasn't quite like I said, most of the pretty much all the I mean the Knicks have never had a godlike player. But Jalen Brunson did give a godlike performance in game 6. So yeah. Shout out to the Knicks, man. But my point is saying that was that Patrick just he didn't quite have enough. John Starks is your second best player. John Starks was at one point he was a CBA player, you know. So maybe if they could have upgraded that, and John Starks was a good player. But if you're trying to win a championship, right, he just wasn't quite good enough. And yeah, so this is finally like vindication, for all those teams and in the '90s, and yeah, like I said, bro, shout out to the Knicks. Congratulations to them, and congratulations to New York City. All right, so before I get out of here, just a reminder to hit that subscribe button next to the Complete Podcast Network, and to follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at TC Pod Network. You can also send feedback and mailback questions to Complete Lakers Podcast at gmail.com. I am out.